Many years ago, the idea of Vince McMahon selling WWE seemed ridiculous. Why would the ultimate control freak want to give up power? Well, according to recently unsealed court filings, Vince never intended to give up power. I'm talking about this because on December 29th, wrestling reporter Brandon Thurston dropped an extensive report detailing an upcoming lawsuit against not only Vince but current members of WWE. The new findings unveil some very interesting details. Also, shout out to Brandon for doing the reporting via Post Wrestling. It's so good to see someone do some real journalistic reporting from the wrestling space. The article's linked down below. Please read the full thing. The title here, I Will Be Your Greatest Partner, How Vince McMahon's 2022 WWE Comeback Was Anticipated by Endeavor Executives. The piece also explains exactly why former WWE shareholders are suing McMahon and other current WWE execs. Of course, our story begins back in the summer of 2022, when Vince McMahon was forced to abruptly resign from WWE amid a scandal that could be potentially damaging to the company's future. And there was a lot going on at this time. This was a very weird time. This when Vince was like starting the shows with pep rallies, but we knew he was about to be out of there. And eventually he was out of there. With all that said, Vince, those around him, and those he could possibly merge with or sell to in the future had every confidence that he would be back. In fact, on the day of Vince's resignation, Endeavor number 2, Ari Emanuel, sent the following email exchange to future CFO of TKO and, at that time, CFO of Endeavor. He writes, Nick and Stephanie are going to take over the WWE for the next 9 months. Vince will be back with a new board, or he will take the company private, or he will sell it, coming to us. The race is on. The courtship is on. Of course, when he's talking about Stephanie, he's talking about his daughter, Stephanie McMahon, Vince's daughter, and Nick Khan. We all know who Nick Khan is. And as you may remember, Vince does come back to the company in January of 2023 in a heck of a power play. Here's how the article summarizes it. McMahon returned to WWE in January 2023. Less than 6 months later, rather than 9, he did so by reinstating himself onto the board of directors, using his superior voting power as a shareholder. McMahon removed several directors. Some resigned, and he added 2 others besides himself. Immediately upon his return, WWE announced it was exploring strategic alternatives, meaning the company was for sale. 3 months after that, WWE agreed to merge with Endeavor, UFC's business, creating the parent holding company known as TKO. Of course, Vince was gracious on his way out, but he also sent an ominous email to the board. It reads, Members of the board, even though I'm no longer employed by WWE as of 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, I'm taking the liberty of using corporate email 1 hour after my official departure. I hope it's alright, LOL. I understand that this has been a painful and arduous process for all of us to reach a conclusion. I have the utmost respect for each and every one of you and ultimately support your decision in making an effort to protect shareholder value. I've always been forthright with the board, and I thank you for helping me build WWE into the promotional juggernaut and cultural icon that it is today. I would expect nothing less than your continued guidance and support for our new leadership team. I would further encourage you to immediately put the past behind us and return to the fun-loving entrepreneurial spirit we previously enjoyed. Thank you, Vince. And very shortly after the resignation, according to even more records, the dinner with Stephanie and Nick Khan absolutely did happen. But at the time, Vince only had voting control in the company. He had no official role. The one thing he would be a part of, though, would be a sale. That he had a lot of influence over. Ari, Vince, let's do Gallagher Steakhouse on Wednesday. Sends him the address. Vince, great. Vince again, bringing Stephanie and Nick. Okay? Question mark. Okay, yes. Muscle emoji. Flex emoji. You know, Vince appreciates that. A few days later, in fact, Ari Emanuel told Vince that he would be his greatest partner, whatever he meant by that. The reporting also dives into the fact that Ari was aware of the financial connections that Vince was making in pursuit of this deal. There's also reference to a chat within Signal referring to the sale of the company. Now, on Signal, the conversations disappear, so less of it is available to be used as public record. This seems to be of a special interest to law enforcement. Now, going back to the dinners that I was talking about, those aren't necessarily illegal as long as those in power still act with fiduciary responsibility within their roles. Here's how Thurston sums up what's being alleged. The lawsuit claimed that McMahon's priority was to secure his future on top of the WWE, despite the sexual misconduct scandal that led to his 2022 resignation, and the payment of millions of dollars in non-disclosure agreements that were not properly recorded on the company's books. Plaintiffs contend that McMahon and Emanuel had a friendship that assured McMahon would stay with the company post-transaction, whereas other potential suitors would have required him to leave WWE permanently. Also, the article goes on to lay out what Vince's next moves would actually be when he would come back. Months later, after a few tense formal emails between McMahon and WWE board around the holidays in early January 2023, McMahon used his controlling voting power to unilaterally return to the company as a board member. He immediately rearranged the board's membership and announced the company would explore a sale process, the events Shapiro anticipated back in July. Stephanie McMahon and other directors resigned, and Vince McMahon was reestablished as WWE chairman. If you recall, Vince was supposed to be like gone in his time away from the company before he came back. And Stephanie ends up leaving at this point. And there was a lot going on with Stephanie. And it was kind of alleged that Stephanie was stepping down because Vince was coming back. Almost it was implied as like in protest of him coming back. But I'm not so sure that was the case. And I'm not so sure they always haven't been in unison. The article then goes on to lay more what's at the heart of the lawsuit. As the sale process unfolded in early 2023, it drew interest from multiple potential bidders, including private equity firm KKR and Formula One owner Liberty Media. Keep Liberty Media in mind. They're going to become a player in a second. Recent deposition testimony from Ted Oberwager, a partner in KKR, and other court records indicate the firm's bid didn't have the time to fully develop before WWE and Endeavor made their deal. Oberwager testified that KKR did not complete its diligence on buying WWE, did not submit a second-round bid, and never reached a point where it finalized a price or quantified potential synergies for a joint KKR-Liberty acquisition of WWE. He said KKR did not finish our work and never obtained sufficient information to establish a final reserve or walkaway price. In filings related to the actual sale, WWE would go on to say that they went with Endeavor because it was the most lucrative offer for them. But the lawsuit also claims that the process really wasn't allowed to unfold in the way that it should have. By their own account, WWE was actually unable to increase their shares beyond what their initial offer was after agreeing to some terms and conditions. One such condition was that Vince McMahon stay on in a leadership role. Now think about that for a second. The company made a concession, getting less in the process, but insisting that the disgraced former leader of the other side come in and remain in a leadership position. Why was Vince so valuable? The article also points out how suddenly it became essential that Vince be a part of this deal, and that was talked about publicly. That's not some new information. Gross as it kind of comes across to us on the outside, it would appear that all of this was above board, or at least that's what we were led to believe. Through this process, Thurston was able to acquire an email exchange between Liberty Media president and CEO Greg Maffei to Blackstone managing director John Barada in regards to news articles about the merger. This was Barada. Looks like they've been cooking this up for a while. I look forward to seeing you soon, hopefully. The response from Maffei, yep, ... pre-wired. They would go on to note that others within Liberty also disputed the official narrative and would note that the narrative was very skewed to the favor and the terms of WWE, as was the entire process. All of this begs the question as to why Vince was thought of as so indispensable. The article even goes on to point out that at the time, even as Vince was drawing down from the company, all business indicators were going up. Why was Vince so important to this deal? Well, it seems like Vince was the key in making sure this deal happened with Endeavor, with Ari Emanuel. Something that hasn't been discussed as much is, yes, WWE was being acquired by Endeavor, who also owned the UFC. So they were the smaller organization being acquired by the bigger organization, but they were needed by that bigger organization. In fact, Endeavor had taken on a lot of debt since acquiring the UFC, and being able to spin that debt off into another company and being serviced by this new, theoretically more efficiently ran company, and a company that would receive a lot of cash, those debts could be taken care of. So both sides really, really needed each other specifically to get this deal done. Vince would get his power. Ari would get his financial relief. At least that's how this article frames it. Now, as far as wrestling fans go, there is a really interesting nugget in here, and it confirms something that was reported at the time. When Vince had his big comeback in early 2023, everyone within WWE was sure to point out that Vince might be back in a corporate setting, but he had nothing to do with creative. But do you guys recall this tweet from Sean Ross Sapp? Do you also recall early 23 Remember WrestleMania? Remember the Raw after WrestleMania? Remember the weird vibes? Remember this tweet from Sean? Yep. This week, a WWE talent reached out and told me they believed Vince McMahon was back in creative. I couldn't get it confirmed at all, but on today's FightfulSelect.com list goes on, 4 p.m. Eastern, I'll discuss what they told me. That tweet was dated February 22nd, 2023. And then look at this exchange shortly thereafter. This is coming from Vince to Nick Khan and also by way of Paul Levesque and Bruce Pritchard. From Vince to Paul and Bruce. Hey guys, just double checking. Does Roman and Cody know about the new creative, re WrestleMania and next year? Bruce, not to my knowledge. I don't know if Paul has had the conversation with either. Roman's first appearance since we spoke Friday in DC. Both will be there in person. Vince to Paul. Paul, have you? Nick Khan, Langus. Vince, and me, and the rest of the free world. What in the blue hell is Langus? LOL. Nick Khan responds with, read it backwards. Well, read backwards, Langus is Signal. Remember the disappearing app. An accessible app. Unsubpoenaable app. Now, should any of this really matter to wrestling fans? I think you can make the case that it should, and for a few reasons. There seems to be this revisionism that's happening with Vince. Like every misstep that Triple H might make creatively or the company makes, people seem to think that Vince would have never done it or things were that much better when Vince was around. And let's be honest, the social and political climate are making things ripe for a restoration of Vince's legacy. And part of that legacy is as a creative genius and as a business genius. And that's the story that these guys like to tell. But as we can see from what's going on here, maybe these makers of industries, these titans of sport, maybe they're not so smart. Maybe they're not so creative. Maybe the thing that makes them good is they're just better at rigging the game. Now, in 2026, I'm not telling you anything you don't already know when it comes to that. But what I find most relevant as it pertains to WWE is that there's these co-defendants that remain in this lawsuit. And I really want to get to the bottom of what their role is. Post-Vince, there's been this PR campaign to reframe WWE as being part of this blossoming new, innovative Paul Levesque era. One that sets itself apart from the toxic and antiquated, creatively bankrupt latter years of the Vince McMahon era. And let's face it, post-Janelle Grant, they really had no choice but to take this position. To be clear, I'm not saying they committed crimes on the level of what's being alleged of Vince. And no doubt the creative has improved since the new regime took over. What I am saying is, should we view the current administration as anything other than the succession of and an extension of the previous era? After all, it was Nick and Steph joining Vince to allegedly smooth the deal over during the time when Vince was in exile. And let's not forget that Nick Khan and Triple H received some nice paydays for that deal going down the way it did. They would have received paydays regardless, but the speed and the efficiency of this really worked out for them. Do you draw the line between the two camps? Sound off in the comments section down below.